Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kate O'Gorman, and on behalf of Thistledown Press, I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's Thistledown Readers Club event. Thistledown Press is a 45-year-old publishing company which came under new management in 2020. The press is an active force in the Canadian literary landscape, producing original, engaging, and thought-provoking books by new and established Canadian authors, while honoring its past as a legacy press founded in Saskatoon in 1975. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this evening's featured author and I are connecting online from Saskatoon, where I am on Treaty 6 territory, and from London, Ontario, where Connie is, on the traditional lands of the Anishinabek, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wauk, and Attawandan people. We would like to thank our founders, Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, and the Government of Canada for their publishing program. So a little bit to introduce our guest this evening, Connie. The Rasmussen Papers is Connie's third novel. Her fiction has won several Saskatchewan Book Awards, as well as being shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize for the Best Novel of Canada and the Caribbean, and longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Connie has edited fiction, taught many creative writing classes, and mentored emerging writers. After spending most of her life in Saskatchewan, she now lives in London, Ontario. So please help me welcome Connie Gault. Thank you for being with us, Connie. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. How are you?
Thanks, Kate. I'm fine. And it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you about the book.
Well, we're really excited to kind of dive in. Loved reading the book, and I know I'm not alone. So we have lots of people joining us, and we have lots of questions for you. But before we get into that, I wonder if you would share a little reading with us.
Sure. I'm going to read a very short piece. Gives a bit of the flavor of the book, or of the narration. Of all the ways to look at the world, the lens of paranoia is one that comes easily to me. Stories of bad service are always ready on my lips. Waiters in restaurants, clerks in stores, I often suspect they've conspired to obstruct me. They don't want me in their establishments and won't tell me why, and they exchange glances when I complain. I'd been ignored in the deli and left without buying the cheese I'd wanted. In a twee shop, I was treated disdainfully in exchange for the opportunity to leave with 3 lemon tarts. I was wending my way through a small neighborhood park, feeling that everyone was against me, when I looked a little further than my navel and saw that the sky was crammed full of bulbous white clouds that looked like breasts. It was so unusual, I took some pictures. There were hundreds of them hanging down, luminous, full, and pillowy. Who did I have to share this with? I was sorry that the first person I thought of was my ex. I could only conclude that I had my own traitor living inside me, or I would never think of him again. Before I put my phone away, I was assaulted by a sprinkler. Water meant for the already lush grass sprayed the walkway and me. I came home wet and angry, sure that some park worker had set the sprinkler deliberately askew on purpose to ruin not just my day, but everyone else's too. Write about it, Harry advised. I didn't explain that suspicion of waiters and clerks and gardeners was not really the biggest subject occupying the back of my mind, and that the anxiety that had set off my paranoia was about men. One of them him. Was he on my side, or was he on Aubrey's? I was almost sure he sympathized with me. But did Aubrey have a hold of some kind over him? Even after our evening out, which had brought us closer, I still wondered if I could trust him. Also on my mind was the problem of whether or not I should reveal that I wasn't entirely trustworthy myself.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. You're right. That was a really good passage to choose So I think it perfectly kind of encapsulates who the unnamed narrator, just that angst and that constant questioning of whose agenda is what and what's really going on here and who's looking to do what. So
Yeah.
before we kind of get into all of that, though, I want to recognize and I want to ask you, you model this novel off of Henry James's The Aspern Papers. The title, everything is a reflection of that. From the plot to the unnamed narrator, you basically modernize that novella. So I'm wondering where this idea came from. Now, I have not read the Henry James novella, so I came into this completely blind. I don't know how much is mirrored, but I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about where the idea came and how you unpacked that process.
Yes, sure. I should start by saying I'm a big Henry James fan. I've read not every single thing he wrote, but a whole lot. And the Aspern Papers was one that I had not read until recently. So whenever I wrote this 3 years ago, something like that. So I, of course, enjoyed it. It's a lovely novella. But I was a little disappointed in his treatment of women. Now, I know that it was written a long, long time ago, 1888 it was published, so we give some leeway for the times. But even so, he's written much better women characters, like in The Portrait of a Lady, for example. Right. So I thought that especially the younger of the women was meant to be pitied. I thought he actually set her up to be pitied, so he could have a nice ending to his novella. And I thought, oh, I'd love to just take that novel and rewrite it from a woman's point of view. So instead of a man goes into a house where two women live, a woman goes into a house owned by two men, which makes good sense anyway, because as we know, the house of fiction is still kind of run by men, even though women write it very well. So I thought, oh, this would be great. But I never thought I'd do it, because, I mean, little me write a novel based on Henry James seems a bit bold, let's say. So, but at the same time, a good friend of mine and a former English professor, Joan Givner, was going through a kind of rough time in her life. And I thought, oh, maybe I will just dash this off to amuse her. So I did. I just dashed off a first draft and I gave it to her. And she thought that was pretty good, and then, but then, of course, I started getting more serious about it and revising it and getting deeper into the characters and so on. And that's how it came about.
Wow, that's remarkable. So, I mean, it really was just, it kind of grew organically then. It sounds like it wasn't that you had an agenda necessarily to set out to recreate this, but it was just something that struck your fancy.
Well, it did. And you see, there's, I don't know how to explain it, but when you really like a writer, and you start to think, how does he do what he does, right? And a lot of what Henry James does is what he calls hinges, right? He has these hinges in his narrative, which are plot-based, but really character-based too. So it was fun to kind of look at that novella in a writerly way.
Oh, I bet. And I'm wondering, so you had the bones to work with. And as you said, you could just kind of dash off this first draft fairly quickly. You had it all kind of together in your mind. But I'm wondering about the character development. Was that ready formed in your mind when you had this idea of switching it to a female narrator? Did that have to, what was your process for discovering who she was?
Yeah. There's always a lot of discovery to be made about a character once you start writing, but on the other hand, for me, they're usually pretty much there as soon as I don't usually start writing anything without a character in mind. So she was, I always see them kind of in a situation maybe, you know, some kid is sitting on the playground. I see her sitting there and I start thinking, why is she just sitting there alone? That kind of thing. And in this case, after writing or reading the Aspern Papers, and you know, there was something combative in me about it, right? Because I wanted to kind of write my own way into that. So when I saw this character, I saw her knocking on the door of this house, and she had her fist up like this to knock. And, you know, I didn't think of it at the time, but that's the image I started with her.
Oh, really? Of her at the Ash's front door?
Yeah.
Ready, armed already to kind of get.
Already. This is one of the most combative things I've ever written, I think. She's ready for a fight. She's not a very good fighter, but she's up for it.
Yeah, no, she's definitely feisty, and she definitely has, I mean, she's got, it's sort of focused externally on this obsession with Marianne Rasmussen. But I mean, she's struggling with this divorce that she's going through. And so she's got all of this, she brings all of this angst and all of this loss and all of this vulnerability, but she's very feisty. I mean, I'm not sure I could imagine, I mean, myself or anybody else, as a single woman just walking up to a stranger's door, even though I suppose, you know, our beloved writers are the writers that we love, we kind of we project that we know them. Yes. Even though they don't know us, right? We project that we have this relationship with the writer through their work already. But she's ballsy to really go up and quite brave, I think. I mean, I'm wondering, especially as a woman, if you were intentional about portraying her as quite strong and strong-minded, wily a little bit. She has an agenda. She's able to keep secrets. She kind of weasels her way in without, I mean, she has a conscience. She thinks about what she's doing, and she has, you know, she second guesses lying to these men, right, about what her motivation is. But I mean, did you have a sense of who you wanted to portray in terms of an archetypal woman, right? A strong woman or a conflicted woman, or was there something that you were wanting to say with her?
It's so complicated, but I knew from the start that she was in trouble. Like, she was going to get in bigger trouble too. You know, that's what a plot's about, really, isn't it? So one of the reasons she was going to get into trouble was because she was tricking herself from the start into, you know, trying to justify the means by the end, which, you know, and this love of hers for this poet's work and wanting to write this biography. And it was so important. And not only was it important for Marianne Rasmussen, but it's so important for herself to turn her whole life around by writing this great biography. And and so all along she's saying to herself, well, if I do that, it's because, you know, they're against me, or you know, the whole publishing industry is against me, or I have to do that. This is the only way I can win. She was, you know, all of this stuff is probably going on in the background, at least of her mind. And she forgets, you know, that other things are important in life.
Yeah, she's definitely, she gets completely enmeshed in this web that she's created partly and just entwined herself in. Is she a good person? Like, when you think about her, right? Because I imagine she's quite real for you, as she is for us. She was for me, certainly. And I kept wondering, like, does she think, well, none of us think of ourselves as bad people, but I was starting to wonder, is she a good person? What are your thoughts about her?
Well, I don't think I can really judge her from the outside, having lived with her more or less closely like that. I think that she has a conscience. She is determined to be strong. So that's one thing I wanted to pick up on. You mentioned, is she a strong character? I'm not sure she is very strong at all. I think what she is determined. So, and she thinks that to get what she wants, she has to be strong, manipulative, tough on, fight these men and get these papers she needs. And that's how the world works, right? Because it doesn't work the way she used to live. And things all went wrong for her. So now she's going to do this other kind of thing. So I think that complexity intrigued me. So I'm a pretty trustworthy person, but it was really fun to write somebody who was willing to go for it like that, even if she was fooling herself all along the way.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's a part where there's a lot of internal dialogue happening. Most of the book is internal dialogue.
Right.
But she even tells us, that she believes good girls finish last. She tells us this. So we know that that's one of her beliefs, she confides that in the reader. But there's that whole interesting scene with Ryan Benson where she has caught him in a lie. I don't want to do a spoiler for those who haven't read through it, through to the ending, but there's just so many intrigues, I guess. People are playing each other throughout the entire novel, let's just say. And there's this scene with Ryan Benson, who we initially meet as interviewing her and kind of gets her involved with these gentlemen, but she's caught him in a lie, and I don't know how you do it. I mean, I find your book I want to study it because I find it so interesting how you're able to capture her own self-doubt, her own double thinking, the way that we all do, right? We all have this double speak in our head. We'll say one thing, we'll be in a conversation with somebody, and we have this interior dialogue happening at the same time, like, well, I think I just caught him in a lie, or can we trust myself for saying this? So she's in this coffee shop with Ryan Benson and she's caught him in a lie. She knows it. She's told the reader this in her internal dialogue. She doesn't fully trust him, and yet she goes out of her way to buy his coffee and to pay for his pastry. Right? Like, yep. I just find that so interesting and so telling in such a very delicate, quiet way of kind of who she is. It's very human, and I think you capture it really, really well. How hard was it to keep her as an unnamed narrator? Why was that important?
It wasn't hard at all because I never gave her a name.
You didn't?
I don't know what her name is. No, I haven't a clue. And it might partly be because I think the narrator in the Aspern Papers isn't named. So maybe I just kind of fell into that idea that you would just, that she doesn't need a name. But also, I think, writing in the first person, which I haven't done until recently, is different. And it's almost like you're a ventriloquist. So you've got this dummy here, but the dummy's smart too and can play tricks on you, and you can be surprised by what comes out of that mouth that isn't yours, but has kind of a close connection to you because of the word I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I almost hesitate to ask this because as I've told you before, it's kind of cliched, but because of that first person voice, I kept wondering, like, how much of the author is in this voice? And it's not really fair to ask. I mean, it's fiction, right? A writer writes fictional characters, but at the same time, I'm wondering, does that line ever blur? Especially because you didn't give her a name. I find that really fascinating and really surprising, Connie, that even for yourself, she doesn't have a name. But how much do you think, I mean, not just of this unnamed narrator in this book, but of all your main characters, of all your protagonists, how much do you think that you as the author blurs into your characters?
Oh yeah, it's a hard question. I'm not sure if I could adequately answer it, but I think that each character I write, even some that seem really, really different from me, have some aspect of me, I'm guessing, because if I get into them at all, that's because I'm really thinking about who they are. I'm feeling who they are. So, but in this novel in particular, I sort of play with that because the novel starts and ends with a small snippet of someone who almost sounds like she is the writer, right? Yeah. And she's so those are the sort of, yeah, that frames the novel. So it's like, is she the real writer? Or am I the writer? Is she the writer? Or is the narrator the writer? So it's kind of fun to think about that. And I think probably most writers, when you write in the first person especially, you think about that. And, sometimes I'll give memories of mine to a character, but not necessarily to the characters that are more like me. I do sometimes tend to feel a bit paranoid in pastry shops like my narrator. So you give them those kind of little quirky things sometimes, just because you think they start saying things like that, and then you rein them back in, or they start, if you want to say it a different way, they start asserting themselves and who they are, and they're not me.
Yeah. So they really do take you on a journey, even though structurally you had the Henry James structure to go on. You're saying she really did develop into her own character over time as you worked with her.
She's very different from his main character.
Okay.
Some of the same things happen, but they happen very differently, and she feels differently about them. And her effect on the other characters is very different from what his was. And there's a kind of different things drive a novel. One of them is your own wishes as a writer for what happens, and then the other is the events, and another is the characters, how they interact, and all of that comes together. And so I find, for me anyway, my intentions are low on that. Low down. They're not very important in the terms of how the whole novel plays out.
Right. So it strikes me this project of taking a piece of classic literature and reworking it. I mean, you're not you're not the first to do this. And in very recent memory, Sharon Butala did it recently, a few years ago. She had a short story collection, Season of Fury and Wonder, where each short story is a response to a classic piece of literature. So while it's not unique, I feel it seemed very important. Is it important to you? Was this, or as you said, does this just something you kind of fell into unexpectedly, or is it important for you to, I don't want to say is there an agenda behind it, but is it important to do these kind of projects to sort of keep that classic literature alive in some way, or to remind readers of this whole oeuvre, right, of literary work that people like me, I haven't read it, right? So I'm reintroduced to something new. Was that intentional, or give me your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it probably wasn't intentional, or not that intentional. But I do think that people should read the classics, although obviously the classics are different depending on how, your own age, your own background. So it doesn't have to be, Victorian literature. It could be from Pakistan, the classic literature from any other country or place, and time, really. I think classic literature is classic because it's good, and it lasts because it's good, and it's good to read. But it also, I think, it kind of shows that time we tend to think like, okay, I'm this generation, you're that generation, somebody else is Gen Z or something, and we're all different. But it's not, of course, true at all. We're all, people are pretty much basically the same. And in fact, a friend sent me a little piece from Harper's, I think it was, on George Eliot, and on how George Eliot somehow, I have to say, I found the piece hard to follow, but it was something about how George Eliot has something to say about US politics right now, even though she was writing back in the mid 1800s, right? So, and she's in my novel too. George Eliot pokes her head in because she's really an important writer. And I love George Eliot's work, and I love her seriousness and her sense of humor. And she says things that are totally current, the same kind of things we might say right now, but she just uses a different language.
Sort of timeless themes.
Yeah, well, it's true. Well, even with this novel, like I start this novel with a quote from Henry James about writing, there's no more money to be made in literature, he said in 1888, right? And we're saying the same thing today. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I particularly enjoyed that as the first time I read it, and I read that first, I laughed out loud and had to read it out loud to my partner because I thought, oh, that's priceless. That's hilarious.
It's pretty funny.
I'm wondering a little bit about the relationship of Aubrey Ash and Marianne Rasmussen. Marianne Rasmussen, by the way, I love the name. And if you Google it, it's actually quite a popular name. I don't know if you did that with any of your characters. But
I did, of course.
Yeah, it's quite popular. All of the people around the world with the name Marianne Rasmussen.
A lot of Danes, a lot of Danish people.
Yes, yeah. But in the book, you talk about how they're sort of, well, they aren't sort of, they are Canadian Canlit royalty in these two characters, Aubrey Ash and Marianne Rasmussen. And I couldn't help but try and correlate them, right? Who are they modeled after? Do you have an idea of somebody did you model them after anybody?
No.
No.
And if I did, I wouldn't tell you.
That's fair. That's totally fair. But I did love the nod. I mean, it was almost, you can feel your love of Canadian literature. It's sort of an homage in a way. It felt to me as a reader that you were offering through these two characters. I love Aubrey. I love his characterization. I think I can see him. I've met him, Yeah, and I find I loved it for that reason, because it was so relatable. But I also found it so interesting how you flip the traditional gender norm narrative between the two, because part of why the unnamed narrator is so obsessed with Marianne Rasmussen is because Aubrey Ash is her muse, not the other way around, right? Yes. I mean, she is known for these, her most important work is because of the time she spent with Aubrey Ash, who was established in his own right, but he was her muse. And I guess that same question, which I kind of keep asking you tonight, but was that intentional, or did that come organically?
I don't think it was probably in the first draft, but it was something, as I wrote the novel, I just kept thinking more and more about gender in fiction and poetry, and in all the ways we writers approach our business of writing, and things like, and especially in terms of biography, what happens, and the idea of a muse, a male muse, is, I'm sure I'm not the first person to have that idea, but it was fun to Yes, and it's also fun to just play a little bit with the whole sexual dynamics of like the narrator is quite conscious of being able to flirt a bit with men during her lifetime, and has always enjoyed that. And there's a kind of power thing in that, right?
Yeah, definitely. She wields that intentionally. I mean, she makes no bones about it. She's very clear. I mean, she intends to seduce Harry, the brother, to get him on her side so that, he'll help her. I mean, it's very, I don't know if calculated is the right word, but she's very upfront about it,
Yes, yes. She just didn't expect it to, go too far, right?
Yeah, which is always that's the fun, right? When you as the reader, when the character starts to fall in love and you as the character start to fall in love too, right?
Yes.
That whole narrative is lovely. We never meet Marianne Rasmussen and we never meet her ex-husband, but they're very present within the novel. How hard is that? I mean, to embody characters that the reader doesn't physically meet on the page, but that we know quite clearly through her internal dialogue. What's your process for making these invisible characters visible?
I don't know. I think what it is I just believe in them. They're real to me. So when I didn't even know that Irv, that's Marianne Rasmussen's husband, I didn't even know that Irv existed until my narrator said that she went to his funeral, and then all of a sudden Irv just popped up. I could see his photo over the coffin. I could see him completely, and the cousin that she meets there with the pink hat. She was like, I don't know. It's just like a kid, playing dolls or something. I've got them. They're mine.
Yeah. Would you say do you daydream a lot about your characters before you? Or do you write? Do they come across as you're physically writing out,
Yeah, as I'm physically writing, yes. I do sometimes say, I'm lying in bed at night and I can't sleep, and I might think about, my main character in particular, and usually quite pleasant thoughts about my main character, no matter what. Just appreciating her, what she's doing in the novel, that kind of thing, which is nice at night when you're trying to get to sleep. But I don't daydream much because I'm mostly just, I see what I think when I write it.
Yeah. I find that fascinating. So for me personally, writing, does anything get junked? Do you write it and say, no, that's not her?
Oh, I throw away like 90% of what I write.
Yeah. Wow. 90%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, we have a couple questions that some of our audience members have submitted, and you're always welcome to submit something in through the chat, and Jacqueline will let me know if you have a question for Connie. But I've got a question here from Jerry. Jerry asks, the title alone, never mind the publisher's framing of the launch, implies a reader. What reader do you imagine? I'm wondering if Jerry is meaning the opening, as you already kind of highlighted.
Yes. What reader do I imagine? I imagine somebody who likes to read. That's the main thing. And who's willing to read something that's maybe a little bit off the wall or different than, not a bestseller kind of novel. That's about all, I think. I don't, I don't really write for readers. I don't think much about the reader. I think more about the characters. I just sort of kind of, you know, I've got these characters. I'm going to do my best for them. That's the way I approach it.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever works for that, you know, and then the craft comes in a bit too, you know, like, for example, that opening frame, we just had a Toronto book launch and somebody asked me how I came up with that first sentence. And I said, oh, I don't know. I had to look at it to make sure what it was. But I don't know how I came up with it, but when I did, I knew it was the right first sentence for the novel. So it just felt, that's the way to, I think you want to set a tone. And I wasn't really thinking about how that tone would affect a reader. I was just thinking about how it worked, those words in that order, how they work.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about partly a craft question. There's a book reviewer that I was reading who reviewed this book, and she talks about, she quotes Elisa York's blurb on the back of your book here.
Yes.
And Elisa York says, the Rasmussen Papers is an urban fox of a novel, light-boned, beautiful, and sly. I loved every inch of it, from the dark knowing of its nose to the quicksilver tip of its tail, which is a beautiful book blurb. Yes. But I'm wondering how, and it's very, the characters are very fox-like. They're very foxy, right? Everybody's trying to negotiate around the other with a separate agenda. And again, without trying to reveal too much about the ending, how difficult is it to keep a character constantly in the dark when you know where the plot is going? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It all depends on that character, I think. For many characters that you would have to be resorting to all kinds of silliness in order to keep her in the dark. But she is so foolishly centered on what she wants to accomplish. So she's so determined. She's kind of blind, I think. She doesn't see the signs, or she sees them, and it's just like she decides to pay for Ryan Benson's coffee. It's like, well, let's skate past this little bump, right? That's how she thinks. Because what she wants is really important to her, and she's going to get it. And so that kind of blindness, I think, is what lets her not acknowledge what she really kind of must know as she goes along in some way. Then what keeps happening to her is she keeps meeting people who are outside the plot, which was great fun for me. I didn't realize what I was doing, except that she kept meeting these people and they seemed important, so I kept writing about them. And they just had to, she rubbed them all the wrong way, kind of. Almost everyone got angry with her or was in some way reacting to her. And yeah, so it took me a long time to discover why that was and what they were doing. But finally I did.
Okay, now I'm going to ask, what were they doing?
Well, let's say they were, I think, so there's like two parts to the novel in my mind. One part is the plot, this obsession with getting these papers of Marianne Rasmussen's and writing this wonderful biography. That's all a plot. And how they trick each other and all of that. In a way, that's almost the fake part of the novel. And the real part of the novel, in my mind, is all those peripheral characters who are the other side of obsession. So that's like the antithesis of obsession is living a daily life. rubbing up against people, showing people who you are, other people telling you who you are and telling you where to get off, and all of that stuff. That's what she's missing by being so obsessed about what she wants to do. And it took me a long time to figure out that that's what was going on with all these other characters who were, they're combative towards her too.
Yeah, I almost was, wondering if they were the external representations of her vulnerability, of her hurt, that there's sort of the underlying, right, that she's constantly battling to and not really willing to look at head on, this separation that she's experienced, except, to be angry about it, but she's not willing to really be honest, it seems, about it. And I wondered if these other characters are a way of expressing that to her.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know. I had never thought of that. It didn't occur to me. The interesting thing to me is that most of those outside characters, are people I actually met over the last several years when staying in Cabbagetown.
Interesting.
They're mostly real people that I met, that I changed somewhat here and there. But yeah, they really are the real part of the novel. But because of the way that plot takes over our thinking, they almost seem like they're not real. I think, it's an odd function of how our brains work. I think.
It does have that. If it had that effect for me, it was almost I don't know, ghostly effect might be too strong, but it definitely felt like every time she had one of those encounters, she was encountering an inner demon, if that's, do you know what I mean? She was encountering something uncomfortable, right?
Yes. And so what's really happening, to this extent, I agree, they're showing her who she is, whether she likes it or not, because they don't care about her, and they don't have any need to be polite to her. They're various people that she meets. Some of them are, from homeless drug addicts up to, just ordinary people on the street or in the streetcar, that she watches or has something to do with. But most of them end up kind of poking her and showing her a little bit more if she would just pay attention.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, lots of layers. I'm going to go to another question that we've had submitted from somebody who's watching. And you may have answered this a little bit, but maybe we'll circle back to it and see if it sparks something new. Jillian asks, does your inspiration come more from personal experience or from less direct historical or other researched sources? I imagine doing this kind of project would take maybe a bit of research, but maybe I'm wrong.
I can't remember how much research I did for this one. So I've written 3 novels, and the first one, because it was all set quite far in the past, in the 1800s up to 1912, I did a ton of research for. The second one, less. This one, much less. So I don't really rely on research much, but every once in a while you need to check up on something, not just facts, but so I did some reading of poetry from that time frame in the 60s. I did some looking up at what was CanLit like in Toronto in the 60s, just so I didn't get anything really wrong. And a lot of it is based on my own knowledge of how I feel. Like, she's a woman from Saskatchewan, and that also is a really important, because I think when you're outside your environment, you're a different person in a way, or you're much more apt to think about who you are. And the fact that she's a woman from Saskatchewan comes up a few times, and as it does sometimes when you're in Toronto, totally different kind of environment. Yeah. So
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's both based on in reality, based on memory, based on mostly imagination, though, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And reading, of course. I mean, obviously in this book in particular, but reading, yeah.
In your mind,
Mm-hmm.
do the Rasmussen Papers exist?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because Marianne Rasmussen, in my mind, exists. And so it was really important to me, some of the facts about her life and what happened with her, and how she was this wonderful poet and not very acknowledged. She had a few, small chapbooks, some fervent fans, and then she died fairly young, and didn't ever have the joy of knowing that a lot of people might someday read her work. And I thought, there's something really moving to me about that. It happens to so many people, women especially, but not just women, that their work gets lost. And yeah, so it was important to me.
Who are some of your favorite poets and authors?
Well, favorite poets, there's so many. Well, of course, Emily Dickinson, Elizabeth Bishop. I really like a lot of Saskatchewan poets, but recently I've been a big fan of Randy Lundy's. I really like his books. And as for fiction, well, I don't know. There's just so many. I don't think I can even tell you. But right now I'm reading Lydia Davis, which is just right for when you've got all this other distracting stuff like book launches and stuff going on, because Lydia Davis writes these quirky little tiny, tiny stories that you kind of think like, how is this a short story? I don't know. So then that gets me really thinking. I enjoy reading it, but I don't know why is that a story? You know what I mean? So it's fun to read Lydia Davis.
So that's really great. That's really interesting to hear too, that, I mean, you've had a very successful career and you're still going to be writing. I'm sure you're writing on something now, working on a project now, but that you're still a student of the written word, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. You never stop learning something new. And there's so many writers who write really, differently now, and especially women writers like Deborah Levy. I like her little scrappy bits in how she writes so much, I think, auto fiction almost, some of hers. And I really liked what's Lucy by the Sea. I don't know.
Yes.
Wrote Clara no, what's the
help us out in the chat. Come on, we all know.
Elizabeth Strout, isn't that her name? Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So some of these older women, I'm really interested in reading how they're approaching fiction a little bit differently now, because I think when you're older, you get impatient with some of the I don't know. Maybe I've always been impatient. I have, let's face it. I don't really like to have to, belabor things or write a fulsome account of something, or take my time like you're told you should when you're with fiction. So I'm really impressed by some of these women writers who are writing these, short bursts of fiction. It's great. They still write a good novel.
Liz Phillips, yes, is confirming. Elizabeth Strout, yes. Lucy by the Sea, yeah, and the Olive Kitteridge, also series, perfect. Okay, Susan asks, what's the best time of day for you to write? Do you need a good view in order to write? Can you share a little bit about your space and your writing practice? And
Well, this is my space behind me, if you can see. Um, yeah, right now my space is a corner of my bedroom. That's where I write. And I have a nice big window. No, this is so weird. I just saw myself point and it's the other way. So now I'm totally confused as to where my window is. But anyway, there's a nice big window. It looks out on a park, which is great. A huge number of big trees. God, they do trees big here in Ontario. But also it looks out on the front of this building. I now live in a high-rise building, which I never thought I would. I'm only on the 5th floor, thank goodness. I can get down if there's a fire. But I also can watch people at the front of the building, and it's really fun. I love watching people out there, the dog watchers, the smokers, you're not allowed to smoke in this building. There's many people who go out to the park for a cigarette, even in the coldest day.
so
Kind of
good,
nice.
good people watching for maybe characterization and
Oh,
So what do you hope readers will take with them after reading the Rasmussen Papers?
I don't know. I hope they enjoy the book. I hope the book makes people think things and feel things. But I don't care what they are. I just read the other day, there's a little, maybe it was in Facebook or something. Somebody posted a thing, Joan Didion saying, how that saying that she had that, writing is a hostile act because you're trying to force people to think something you think. No, I don't really want to force anybody to think anything. I just like to open a little few doors and say, well, this is the view from here. Take it or leave it.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to take it. It's a fantastic book, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that. I really enjoyed reading it. We just have a short amount of time left. I mean, we could keep going, I know, but it's amazing how fast an hour goes. Really quickly before we do that, got a couple of questions just to give people one last moment to get a last minute question into the chat in case they have anything they want to ask you before we say goodbye. And while they're thinking, what does reading mean for you, Connie? And what kind of reading has shaped you? You've talked a little bit about your love of classic literature and how you've woven that into the narrative of the Rasmussen Papers, and you've talked a little bit about these women that you're reading and who you're reading right now. But overlooking the whole of your life, what has reading done for you as a writer? What does reading do for you?
Well, I could start with grade 2, which is when I found out that there was such a thing as libraries. So I've mentioned this before. People often ask that question about reading at launches and readings. And yeah, so one day when I was in grade 2, we were marched down a hallway and led into this big room, and it was lined with books. And I thought I had gone to heaven. I could not believe it. I just could not believe that I was allowed to take out 5 books. I took out 5 every week and read every book twice before I brought it back. And that's the way my life was for several years. Now, I actually think that reading for me is something like religion maybe is for other people. It makes me feel that there is reason to have some optimism about people. It's a real faith thing. Sometimes I read something and sometimes it's really unexpected. It'll be just in, a essay somewhere or a poem. It doesn't matter what it is, but it'll just be said so beautifully, just said so right. I think that there's a little bit in here where Aubrey says something about sometimes someone gets the words right. gets it just right. And when somebody gets it just right, I think to myself two things. First of all, oh, thank goodness, I'm so happy that I got to read that. But the other thing is, I think I'm a little bit of part of that. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a great writer. You're still a part of literature when you read. And that's, to me, I don't know, that's how much it means to me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us what you have your hooks into now, what you're writing, what your next project might be? Maybe just a little sample.
I can tell you a little bit about it. It's I've finished actually a solid second draft of a novel that started out trying to be a detective novel, but my idea of a detective novel is quite off the base, I would say. But it was really fun to write too. Now it has two women narrators, two first-person narrators, and they come together eventually. Anyway, it was really another one that was really fun to write. You know, just like everything else, I start writing and I've got like one page written and I think, oh, I'll never get this. And then sometimes, oh, I've already got 6,000 words. I only need 10 times this to make a novel.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, that sounds exciting. I look forward to hearing more.
Yeah, let's hope I can get it published. That'll be the next step.
There you go. The publishing world. We could talk about that for another hour, I'm sure, but we have to leave it here, I'm afraid. So I want to say a huge heartfelt thank you so much, Connie, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your evening with us and sharing your heart and sharing your work and sharing this amazing book with us. We've really appreciated reading it and sharing this time with you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated your questions, Kate. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for having joined us. We want to make sure to thank again our funders and to those of you who have been watching here this evening, a special thank you to you for your support of Canadian books and for small Canadian publishers like Thistledown Press. If you don't already have your copy of the Rasmussen Papers and you'd like to gift one maybe to a friend, you can order directly from Thistledown Press by visiting the website. I think the link may be in the chat, or you can go and purchase one from, of course, your nearest independent bookstore. This is it for us for the summer. Thistledown's Readers Club will, I believe, start again in the fall, so be sure to watch for that. If you haven't signed up for the Thistledown Press newsletter yet, please do so. Again, maybe Jacqueline will put information about that in the chat, and that way you can make sure that you don't miss out on any of the events that we host. And if you'd like to submit a question, if you did submit a question, I know your name was entered for a copy of our next book club read, and you will be contacted directly at the email you used to sign up with if you were the winner of that. So again, until then, I wish you all a wonderful summer and keep reading. And thank you one last time, Connie. Have a great evening.
Bye, Kate.
Bye-bye.